Herzlich willkommen zum English Coach Podcast, präsentiert von trainingtree.de, die personalisierte Lösung im Bereich Erwachsenenbildung. Und jetzt dein Gastgeber, iAntonio Patterson.
Well, hello there. I couldn't help but notice that you have already started to react most to the storytelling element of this podcast, based, of course, on the episodes listened to, downloaded, and shared most to date. Thank you for that. Now, truth be told, I am not a professional storyteller. Your feedback, according to my expectations at least, shouldn't really be based on interest in my standard blah blah about myself. I was expecting more questions around your learning experience. Life is, however, full of paradoxes, contradictions, juxtapositions, contrasts, and duplicities, however you might choose to put it. Things might change. And since this whole initiative is still intended to focus on learning experiences, for what it's worth, I'll run with that, albeit unexpected interest, based on the feedback I've received from you. Now, after getting to episode 10, I am at any rate compelled to reflect again on what I'm doing and why. The frame is the same. As you all know by now, I teach English for work on the separate cover. This here is what I like to call spoken word media made with you in mind, meaning that I'm doing this to serve my community of learners in a more relaxed space, where we both give ourselves permission to relax a little and dance with the language. The English Coach Podcast is freely available to everyone, yes, but it is not an attempt to be everything for everybody. I have tried that before and failed by my own standards. I like to call this a fresh and exciting democratization of the learning experience, because you are encouraged all the time to choose your own sources of learning. You get to make suggestions of what you would like to hear if you want, and I get to keep my own creative freedom to essentially do whatever I want. That way, both of us get to affect how the show develops through dialogue, which involves your feedback and my working with your feedback as it comes. There are many things about this podcast initiative that are counterintuitive, such as the free part. That aspect has already met with skepticism and its fair amount of cynicism. That's only human. Still, as I reflect on these things today, the three main causes that drive this initiative are still very clear to me. One of which is something that I mention quite often, and that is again the democratization of the learning experience. This ties in directly to the notion of self-education. Maybe I build on this storytelling aspect some more with an introduction to another one of my own self-education experiences. Well, then my first attempt to create this kind of engagement started with iEnglish.tv. It was a domain I bought long ago and I no longer own it. .tv simply because .com was no longer available. At any rate, I ran with the domain. I had just gotten my iPhone 4 and I was very excited about it. Back then, everyone was naming everything I something, so I picked iEnglish. That's the truth. The I could mean anything you want it to mean. I integrated that into my whole internet presence and toyed with the idea of how I was going to give more meaning to the TV part. I even went ahead and paid for a logo design. I named a camcorder as a birthday gift wish and tried my hand at doing training videos all on my own. I taught myself how to do video production, not by osmosis or by meditation, of course, but by seeking and finding the knowledge and tools that I needed. My first attempt was charming, but now, in retrospect and from some perspectives, it was simply a failure. In some respects, however, it wasn't a failure, since I do live to speak of the many useful things that I have learned along that learning journey. These things are helping me to do what I'm doing right now. Back then, around about 2010 or so, YouTube didn't enjoy much respect as a source of knowledge, and many of us were much more skeptical of anything that called itself e learning. I, however, felt very compelled to go further in this direction and recognize that it could be something that I attempt to do on my own. The impetus was in many ways driven not only by what I recognized in 2010 as a promising trend, but also because of a continuing education course that I attended at HTW Berlin on digital identity. The course was hosted by a person who has by now become a good friend and source of inspiration of mine, Dr. Anya C. Wagner. Back in 2010, this tangible democratization of the learning experience that I now speak of was still in its infancy. An infancy that has now led to what all of us can now observe. For example, the rise of YouTubers, platforms such as Udemy, Coursera, Creative Live, Patreon, and the Khan Academy, to name a few. Together with the whole glut of, what we like to call influencers of all flavors, offering from everything to everything and nothing. All right, moving right along. Now, again, in retrospect, I was never skeptical, and I even asked for theatre experience when I interviewed potential training partners for jobs. There are pluses and minuses to being a one-man show. As the story goes, this video preoccupation took a rest, and for the most part, the daily grind took over. All was not lost with the video preoccupation though. From that experience, I learned how to integrate video role play into my private training programs, albeit on a smaller scale. I still do that, as a matter of fact, as one of the more powerful learning tools in my arsenal, for those of us, of course, who are willing to pay for the time investment involved in doing that, of course. One of the things I also learned from working with video and from working with one particular training administrator at one of the companies I served was one interpretation of the notion of waste. It says that if a client is not willing to pay for a service, it's waste. In the business world, you could, however, ask the question, waste for who? In 2010, I still sensed that video for training was at a turning point of sorts, and I did continue, albeit in a more thoughtful way, and soon realized that I needed to learn more about light, sound, and photography in general. My continuing self-education learning journey involving sound and training media production speaks for itself right now. What do you think? iEnglish.tv has had its run. Part of the logo still features behind or in front of what I offer to you now. You will still see that little red book floating around. That little red symbol still follows my publication around and looks like a book or a corset or pages of knowledge taking flight. Actually, it comprises an I and an E. My major client at the time was a smaller subsidiary of the Continental Group, not the hotel people. And past students from there might remember the email address and the logos that accompanied some of their, or the logo that accompanied some of their training correspondence. Now, this story of my preoccupation with self-education is long and convoluted. My intention here today is to share some of it in a way that perhaps can benefit you. In Jamaica, we say, Cats and dogs don't have the same look. Puss and dog now have the same look. That was a little Jamaican for you. Maybe some of it works for you. I've always meant to document this experience in some way or another, curating my own story, so to speak, instead of leaving it all up to Google or the other host of crawlers to curate it for me. No better time than now to start doing it myself, even if it means starting in the middle. This view itself speaks to another cause that drives this podcast initiative, that of taking claim of the digital self. As an internet user, I would advise anyone to be active. There is no way to hide from the internet. And if you or we do not own our digital identities and mindfully write our own digital stories, then the powers that be shall hijack it. This identity I speak of is formed more and more every day when we use everything that is connected to the internet. And the Internet of Things hasn't even really started yet. Ask yourself, how much of your existence is expressed online? How much of who you are can only be expressed remotely or online, so to speak? That is another story for another day. Hopefully, my friend, the good Dr. Anya C. Wagner, will grace us one day in the near future with further conversations on this topic. My approach here is, instead of trying to hide, to be aware of the pervasiveness of this internet thing and to be purposefully active within this space. This is easier for me right now because while I may not always be prepared to purposefully put everything about all aspects of my life to the scrutiny and device of mass public media all the time, I neither have anything to steal nor anything to hide. Context is king, and since it will be formed anyway, the only way to be king of yours is to play a part in the shaping of it yourself. Again, this episode is about my learning experience, conversing with ideas. You decide for yourself what might work for you. One way to be aware and purposely active within this space is to also be mindful of the fact that we all have access to the knowledge of the world, so to speak, in our pockets in the form of a smartphone. We can also use it to learn, not only to play silly games and spend all our time giving audience to pop celebrities who, by the very nature of their existence, cannot care about me or you on a personal level. No, I never pretend to be any kind of authority in any kind of way or any kind of ultimate source of knowledge. I do not want that responsibility. Never have. I ask more questions than I ever pretend to give answers for. And when I do, then naturally, only offered and grounded in the wisdom of my own experience. I also invite my listeners all the time to check out other sources and to give meaning to their feedback by voicing it. I also avoid purporting to give answers because I suspect that people already have all the answers they need or all the answers they prefer. The best I can hope for is to touch on some kind of resonance that agrees with the validation, the worldview, or the explanation models that many of us have either already chosen or desire for ourselves. So, all in way of saying, what exactly? I'm saying that you could, for example, decide for yourself what you want to learn. Buy one book if you want to give a little something to the author. Read it, pick out keywords, and ask Google for more. That is one thing that worked for me, one thing that you could try for yourselves. I'm saying that there are many ways out there to get what you want. Many ways that also don't always involve cash payments. These days, bartering seems a more and more attractive option for me, for example. I'm saying that it's beneficial to check out other sources of independent media, like the English Coach podcast. I am saying, as I said in the first episode of this season, I do not know how circumstances will allow me to continue, as resonant as the causes might be. Everything is based on the feedback that I get from you. I refuse to accept that my people are the kind of people who don't say anything unless it is something negative. And if that is another unfortunate fact that I cannot refuse, then I refuse those people. It's that simple. So what is feedback, you might ask? Feedback begins with listening for your own reasons, choosing accordingly to download or to share. Feedback also begins with giving meaning to your sentiments by voicing your ratings or comments and keeping an eye out, or an ear out in this case, for my work with your feedback. I'm saying that you can take ownership of your own digital identity by living it in the same way you take ownership of your own learning journey by living the language. Now, on this day, December 24th, 2019, day 151 of production and day 18 since the first publish, with 350 downloads already, I am saying thank you to all of you for a productive year marked with challenges that still threaten to break my will, some successes, reflection, creativity, and resolve that will define the way forward. I'm saying that the moral of this story here is that if I can do it, you can also do it on your own. And even if your learning journey is marked with pitfalls, failures, and negativity of all sorts, sometimes it's all about progress and not perfection. Perfection on its own can, in some cases, seem quite artificial. So be gentle to yourselves. It's not easy to put myself out into the world like this. As you might sense by now, there is a lot behind it. If I can do it, you can do it too. I'm saying season's greetings, and that with a small win is always a good way to begin. Okay then, we've come to the end of this episode of the English Coach podcast. Feel free to check out the show notes for this episode at www.trainingtree.de/podcast. Like it if you like it, and if you don't, lie to me. Just kidding. But still, feel free to share it with a friend, post a rating, or better yet, write a comment. This will help it to help you as it is intended to do. Subscribe only if you feel like, so you know when there's a new episode available. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to hearing from you, and bye for now.